No one expected an ordinary museum visit to unravel a mystery that had lasted nearly 8 decades. That day, the weather was just cold enough that each breath became a puff of mist. A small family of 3, Michael, his wife Lauren, and their 5-year-old son, Noah, decided to spend their weekend morning visiting the National War Museum, located in the northern outskirts of the city. They didn't expect much. It was simply meant to be a light educational activity for Noah, a hyperactive, curious little boy who asked thousands of random questions every day. Do they have real tanks? Dad, does it smell like bullets? What's war? Is it like in the movies? Michael chuckled at those questions and told him they'd find out soon enough. He had once served in the U.S. military's logistics unit before retiring. Lauren, a preschool teacher, was used to children's unpredictable reactions. But what happened this time was beyond anything they had ever known or prepared for. After buying tickets and receiving a brief orientation, the family entered the second exhibit, a space that recreated major battles of World War II. The lighting was dim, with soft amber tones casting shadows on black and white photographs. A faint scent of old paper and rusty metal lingered in the air, evoking the sensation of stepping back in time. Noah was just as excited as ever. He ran around among the gun replicas, curiously eyeing the soldiers' uniforms displayed behind glass. But then, suddenly, he froze in front of a large vintage photograph. It showed a snow-covered field with soldiers charging through trenches. No one noticed at first. Lauren was still reading the description next to a statue, and Michael was busy taking pictures of an old military jeep. But when they turned around, they saw Noah standing still like a statue. His arms hung limp, his eyes wide open. Staring fixedly at the photograph, "Noah," Lauren called out, her voice tinged with concern. The boy didn't answer. Instead, tears began silently streaming down his cheeks. Michael rushed over, kneeling to meet his son's eye level. "What's wrong?" "Buddy, what's happening?" Noah trembled slightly. Then, as if something deep inside had broken open, he whispered, "I remember this place. It was so cold. The ground was hard. We were hiding behind the haystacks, but they still saw us." The words were broken, but the tone was hauntingly real, too emotionally charged for a 5-year-old child. Lauren was startled. "What did you just say?" "Noah." The boy looked at his mother. His eyes filled with fear. I got shot." "In the leg? Emmerich said he'd come back for me." "But he didn't." None of them understood what was happening. No one had ever mentioned the name Emmerich, and no one thought a 5-year-old child could conjure such a vivid war scene, complete with painful and terrifying details, right in the middle of an ordinary morning. They left the museum early that day, bringing Noah back to their hotel in heavy silence. But the story didn't end there. That night at the hotel, Noah didn't have a fever and showed no signs of sleepwalking, but he kept murmuring fragmented sentences as if recalling a story someone had told him long ago. No, more like as if he had lived it. The tent was burning. They were shouting in Russian. Weber said we couldn't retreat. He said we had to hold the post. Otherwise, the whole squad would be surrounded. Emmerich didn't make it. My left leg was bleeding. It was cold. It hurt a lot. And then everything turned white. Michael recorded everything on his phone. As a former soldier, he had heard many battlefield stories from friends. But what Noah said didn't sound like a game, nor a child's imagination. It was too precise. Every word, every detail, even the military jargon like post, platoon, and Captain Weber were not vocabulary a kindergartner would know. The next morning, when Noah woke up, he was completely normal, as if nothing had happened. He only said he felt tired and didn't want breakfast. But when he saw a travel magazine on the table, with a small photo of the Battle of Stalingrad, he shuddered and whispered, "That's not the place. Where I died was colder, fewer houses, and the snow was whiter." Lauren held her son's hand tightly. Michael sat silently, as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. They decided not to take Noah anywhere else that day. Instead, Michael began researching online about battles in Eastern Europe during the winter of 1943, and then he froze. In a forest near Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, a lesser-known battle took place. One not commonly mentioned in popular history books, but still documented by military historians. The Battle of Warthewald, In December 1943, between German forces and the Soviet Army, one small but curious detail stood out in the records. A German squad was trapped after a counterattack, stationed near a snow-covered mound, where they built a temporary outpost with sandbags and dry straw. Their unit commander was named Weber, and on the list of fallen soldiers, there was a name, Emmerich Vogt, 19 years old. Michael didn't tell his wife or son right away. He needed to be sure. He needed to confirm he wasn't falling into a maze of emotion and imagination. He sent Noah's recordings to an old friend, now a history professor at a university in Berlin. That friend, Stefan, initially chuckled, thinking Michael was telling a strange early-year anecdote. But after listening to the entire recording, he simply replied, "This is impossible, but I need to meet the boy." 2 weeks later, Stefan flew in from Germany. He was a reserved man who had studied Nazi military campaigns in depth, particularly those on the Eastern Front. When he sat down with Noah, he didn't introduce himself as a professor, nor did he bombard the boy with questions. Instead, he quietly unfolded an old, unmarked map and pointed to a spot near the edge. "What do you think is here?" he asked gently. Noah looked at the map, silent. Then he pointed to a different spot. About 3 centimeters away, not there. "It's here." There was a big pine tree. Near it was a muddy trail. That night, we got lost. Weber told us to stop there. Stefan swallowed hard. The spot Noah pointed to matched exactly with the recorded position of Weber's unit, according to an unpublished military document stored in an old war archive in Germany. At that moment, Lauren didn't know whether to be afraid or to feel compassion for her son. Michael, meanwhile, felt a chill down his spine, as if he were listening to a broadcast from the other side of the world or the other side of life. No one in the family had ever believed in reincarnation or past lives. They were pragmatic people, grounded in science and reason. But from that moment on, it felt like a door had been quietly opened. No fanfare, no flashing lights, just as silent as snow falling in the forest. Michael asked Stefan, "What do you think? Could it be that he's the reincarnation of that soldier?" Stefan didn't answer right away. He simply watched Noah playing with puzzle pieces by the window and softly replied, "There are some stories that lie beyond explanation. But sometimes, what we need to do isn't to understand whether they're true or false, but to listen to why they've returned." Rumors about the boy who remembered a past life began to spread among researchers of history, spirituality, and even local media, though the family never intended to share the story. Within weeks, a recording of Noah's voice had made its way onto a forum dedicated to reincarnation phenomena. Strangely, most of the typically skeptical researchers, after listening to it, said nothing. Some historians even called Stefan, telling him they had cross-checked the details Noah mentioned: squad formation, retreat routes, even a Morse code phrase that Noah had whispered in one recording, which turned out to be a private slogan used by Weber's platoon. Every detail matched. Noah, meanwhile, seemed unaware of the storm he had stirred. He still played with Legos, drew pictures, learned to read like any other child. But from time to time, when he heard something that resembled the sound of artillery or watched a movie with falling snow, he would freeze for a few seconds, his eyes distant as if a memory still lingered quietly somewhere within him. One afternoon, as Michael was reading a book, Noah suddenly came over and asked, "Dad, why am I here and not over there?" Michael wasn't sure how to respond. He asked, "What do you mean by over there?" Noah replied, "The place where I died. But now I'm alive again, and I remember." Emmerich never made it home. The simplicity of the words left Michael speechless. In that moment, he felt like he was no longer just a father, but standing in front of an old soul, borrowing the body of his son to complete something left unfinished. Not long after, Stefan returned to Germany. Before leaving, he told Michael something that stayed with him for a long time. Maybe Noah doesn't need anyone to explain anything. Maybe his only task is to tell the story. And our task is to believe. It felt like a farewell. But for Michael and Lauren, the journey was only beginning. They didn't want Noah to become the focus of media attention. nor to be turned into a subject for talk shows about reincarnation. They wanted to protect him as a normal child. However, they also understood. If this was some kind of message hiding, it completely wasn't the answer either. And so, in the following spring, the family decided to do something no one could have anticipated. They took Noah back to the exact place where the old battle had taken place, the Warthewald Forest, now part of the border between Poland and Kaliningrad, Russia. The trip lasted 4 days. They flew from New York to Berlin, then took a train across the border, passing through sparse forests and tiny villages that still bore the marks of war. Stefan had arranged everything in advance with a local volunteer group specialists who searched for the remains of missing soldiers to guide them to the precise spot marked on a 1943 military map. That day, the air was still, but the clouds hung low. The forest had a strangely gloomy atmosphere. Despite it being midday, snow had not yet melted, even though it was March. As they stepped into the area around the snow-covered mound where Weber's unit had once built a lookout post, Noah suddenly stopped. No one said a word. The boy knelt down, picked up a dry blade of grass, and whispered, "This place, this is where I lay." My leg was so cold. Emmerich held my hand, then let go and ran. Lauren was too choked up to speak, even though Michael had mentally prepared for this moment. He still couldn't stop the shock that swept through him. Before him stood his son, but the voice, the posture, the expression did not fully belong to a 5-year-old child. Noah took a few steps forward, then stopped under an old pine tree. He pulled out a white daisy from his pocket, one that Lauren had brought, and gently placed it on the frozen ground. "Emmerich, you can go home now." The words were soft as a breeze, but they echoed deeply in the hearts of those who witnessed them. They left the forest that afternoon, saying little, but each of them felt as though something had been released, as if the memory no longer bound the child, and as if the soul of Emmerich had finally found his way home. Something strange happened after that day. Noah never spoke of the war again. He stopped mentioning anything about the platoon, the guard post, the battle, or even the name Emmerich. He truly returned to being just a normal child, innocent, curious, fascinated by trains and cartoons. Michael asked him only once, "Do you remember the place we went the other day?" Noah shook his head. "Not really. I just remember the white flower." After that trip to the forest of old, Noah seemed purified. No more haunting memories. No more fragmented words in the middle of the night. No more distant gaze whenever he saw snow. It was as if he had closed a door to a past life. A different era. But for Michael and Lauren, that journey still echoed. They couldn't forget the look in Noah's eyes under that pine tree. Nor could they dismiss the feeling that they had just witnessed something sacred, even though no one demanded they believe or explain. Michael began writing down everything that had happened, not to publish it, but as a way to preserve the memory, partly for himself, to ensure no detail would fade, partly for Noah so that if he ever wondered one day, he could read it and find the answers for himself.
Lauren.
On the other hand, chose silence. She never spoke of it to her colleagues, nor to any of the parents at school. Some things she believed were best kept like a warm blanket in winter, not to be flaunted, not to be debated. One night, as Noah lay sound asleep, Michael asked his wife, "Do you think it was all real?" Lauren was quiet for a long time before replying, "I don't know, but I feel like our son is lighter. As if he's been forgiven, or maybe he's the one doing the forgiving." Her answer left Michael in stillness. Yes, maybe it was Noah, or whatever soul resided in him that had carried the weight of regret for decades, only to return to that forest, place down a flower, and leave again. Months later, Stefan sent Michael a short email. Attached was a scanned copy of an old document discovered in the military archives in Dresden, a handwritten report by Lieutenant Weber, detailing the final week of his unit in December 1943. In the last paragraph, Weber wrote, "Vogt Emmerich was hit while trying to pull a wounded soldier named Jonas out of the line of fire. I gave the order to retreat, but neither of them made it back in time." Vogt looked at me one last time, signaling silence. I couldn't save them. When Michael reached the name Jonas, his heart skipped a beat. From the beginning, Noah had never once mentioned his own name in these memories. But if he had said, Emmerich said he'd come back for me, but he didn't then, that me could very well be Jonas. He pulled up the audio log from the previous month, and there it was. A single moment in Noah's sleep, when he had murmured, Emmerich, you will come back. You promised Jonas. Michael didn't know whether to feel joy or fear. Part of him was overwhelmed, as if his son had been connected to someone by a bond that ran deeper than time. Part of him felt awestruck by the question. If Noah truly was Jonas in a past life, why had that soul chosen to return in this form? Life went on. Noah grew up, started elementary school, then middle school. He became an ordinary student, with a love for reading, basketball, and a particular interest in history, though he never again spoke of the war or Germany. There was only one occasion, in 3rd grade, when he brought home a writing assignment describing an imaginary character. The main character's name was Jonas, a young soldier who died in a snowy forest, but with no regrets, because just before dying, he had managed to hold his best friend's hand one last time. At the end of the story, the character transformed into a swallow flying toward the sunrise. Michael read the story and said nothing. He simply placed a hand gently on his son's head and smiled. He understood the old memories might never return, but their imprint was still there, like a faint trace in the snow, no longer clear, but still enough to make one walk more carefully. Then one day, on Noah's 13th birthday, the family received a package from Germany. There was no return address. Inside was an old photograph, showing 3 young soldiers standing together in the snow, holding steel helmets and smiling. Scrawled on the back of the photo was a simple note. Weber, Vogt, Jonas, November 1943. Michael looked at the photo and felt his chest tighten. No one could ever verify with absolute certainty that it was them. But the eyes of the boy on the right, the one labeled Jonas, looked strangely familiar, so much like his son's eyes when he was little. Lauren looked at her husband and whispered, Maybe. Someone out there wants to bring closure, too. They quietly placed the photo in a small frame, setting it on Michael's desk. No fanfare, no explanation, just a piece of the story already told. Now at rest, since receiving that mysterious photo, the family began to live a little more slowly. They no longer chased answers, nor tried to explain everything. They chose instead to live with the mystery as a natural part of life, like the wind threading through the trees, real yet untouchable. Noah never learned about the photo. Michael and Lauren kept it from him not out of fear, but because they wanted him to grow up freely, unbound by memories he never chose. Time passed. Noah entered his teenage years, slowly developing his own interests, music, literature, and old black and white films that he said had real depth. Michael often found himself surprised by his son's taste, but then realized perhaps there was always something in Noah that was older than his years, a calmness beyond explanation. One time, while walking through the autumn woods with his son, Michael asked, Do you think someone could have lived in another time before this one? Noah didn't turn to look at him. He walked a few more steps, then said, Maybe, but I think it doesn't matter who we were. What matters is who we choose to be in this life. Michael stopped in his tracks. That sentence, spoken so calmly by a 14-year-old boy, carried a profound weight, a truth that needed no debate. He asked nothing more. Years later, when Noah entered university, he chose to major in psychology and anthropology, 2 fields that, according to him, helped me understand the hidden layers of the human soul, even the parts people don't speak aloud. Michael and Lauren simply smiled. They no longer tried to interpret every decision their son made. They understood that Noah was following his own path, and if the past really did live on inside him in some form, then that journey was quietly healing itself. When Noah turned 20, on a quiet night before Lunar New Year, Michael handed him the old notebook. Inside were all the recordings, the accounts, the photos, and thoughts from when Noah was just 5 years old. The pages had yellowed, their corners curled, but every word remained intact as if time hadn't faded a thing. Noah read each page silently. He turned them as if reading the biography of someone else. He smiled lightly at parts, furrowed his brow at others, and at one point Michael noticed his son's hands trembling slightly. At last, Noah closed the notebook and said softly, I don't remember much, But reading these pages, I feel like I owe someone a thank you. Michael asked. What do you want to do with the notebook? Noah replied. I'll keep it. But I think I've already done what I needed to do. Years later, when Noah had become a researcher in memory and personal identity, he began writing a book not to recount his own life, but to share thoughts about memories that don't belong to the mind, but to the soul. The book was titled The Snow Remembers. In it, Noah didn't declare reincarnation to be real, nor did he try to convince readers of any particular belief. He simply told, in a gentle tone, that once, as a child, he cried in front of an old photograph and that those tears led him back to a frozen place. Where a friend never made it home, the book was warmly received, not just in psychological circles, but among literary, philosophical, and spiritual communities. People said, there was something in Noah's writing that made them believe in the tenderness of things beyond explanation. In a television interview, when asked whether he truly believed he had lived a past life, Noah smiled and replied, maybe, but I don't need proof to believe in compassion. I believe that in each of us, there's a part of someone else, a memory, a glance, an unfinished word, and if one day that returns, perhaps what we need to do isn't explain, but listen. That winter, Noah returned to the WWII forest one final time, not as a child seeking answers, but as an adult calm, clear-hearted, and aware of what he was doing. The snow was still falling, thin as a memory just beginning to stir. The forest had changed, new trees had grown, and old paths were now moss-covered. But Noah still recognized the pine tree where he had once placed a white daisy, the place where a part of him had once said goodbye. He brought no camera, recorded no vlog, and posted nothing online. He simply walked alone, carrying a notebook, a bouquet of wildflowers, and a dry pine branch he picked up along the trail. Sitting beneath the tree, he quietly wrote in his notebook, Emmerich, if you were real, thank you for keeping your promise, and I have returned, not to reclaim anything, but to say, I lived, I forgave, and I understood. He laid the bouquet down and stood. The sky was gray, but inside him, there was more light than ever before. Noah's story was never made into a blockbuster film. There were no gunshots, no sensational twists, but it still spread through word of mouth, through workshops, through people who read his book and felt something within them quietly shift. People stopped asking, was Noah really Jonas? Instead, they began asking, how can a memory that doesn't belong to us still guide us to become kinder human beings? That was a question Noah never answered out loud, but his life full of kindness, depth, and peace became its own kind of response. One late autumn afternoon, when Noah was in his 40s, he received a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bearing just one line. Jonas, danke für deine Rückkehr. Ich bin angekommen. Jonas, thank you for returning. I have arrived. No one knew who sent it. No one could explain why it arrived on that exact day, 40 years to the day since the battle at WWII ended. But Noah simply smiled, folded the letter, placed it inside the old notebook he always carried, and stepped out onto the balcony to watch the first snow begin to fall. In his classroom, Noah often asked his students one question. If you had the chance to remember something from a past life, a pain, an unfinished word, a hand you never got to hold, what would you do with that memory? There was no correct answer, but there were eyes that lit up in the silence. And that was enough. The story of Noah, of Emmerich, and of the soldier named Jonas may never be accepted as evidence of reincarnation or of any supernatural phenomenon, but it is a glimpse into the invisible threads that connect people beyond time, beyond nations, and beyond life and death. It is the story of a young soul who came back just to say goodbye, a story of forgiveness that needed no words, and a story that reminds us that sometimes all it takes is an old photograph, a tear, to open the door back to something we left behind in the cold wind. Because some memories don't live in the mind. They live in the heart. And stories like this one deserve to be told. If you've ever heard a strange story like this one that logic can't explain, but the heart understands, leave us a comment. We're still listening, because somewhere out there are still souls waiting to be remembered. Do you believe a memory can transcend time and return in the form of a child? If this story moved you, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other tales, just as mysterious and just as real pieces of the soul, of memory, and of quiet human kindness. Because there are still stories like this that deserve to be told. And maybe the next story is one you've forgotten, just waiting to be remembered.